Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne, and today with my guest, Erica Hanlon. Erica is a licensed professional counselor. She is a former therapist for sex offenders, but she left that career in the corporate grind by taking charge of her own life and building a successful life coaching business. Now, Erica works with clients to psychologically recalibrate their subconscious BS. She helps them to stop self-sabotage, to stop treating themselves like crap, stop waiting for external validation, and she teaches them to make big moves in their life, career, and businesses. Erica's done corporate training for FedEx, Home Depot, Walmart, UPS, Adobe, and Aetna, and she's happily married, a mom to twins, and a bonus baby. I love that thought. So hello, Erica. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon.
Hello. Yes, thanks for having me.
To frame up this conversation, I want to touch on your background because we have had one conversation and we didn't get into your background. And I have to say, when I was reading your bio, I was like, a career in counseling sex offenders, which I can only imagine how difficult and stressful that was. And you knew you wanted to change, but like all of us, you had these limiting beliefs and, negative thoughts and kind of that talk that kept you thinking you probably couldn't make that move and be successful. So tell us a little bit about how that played out, and was there a pivotal moment that sort of led you from that to this?
Yeah. So I thought I was going to be a career employee. I was like, when I thought of entrepreneurs, I always thought of somebody who was just not me, like somebody who was polished and not at all awkward and 100% confident and had no, self-doubt. I always thought of like these really big magnetic personalities. And I thought, well, that's just not me. That will never be me. I will always work for somebody else. And I think what happened was, so I was working in my corporate job and I was bored to death and I didn't know what to do. And I knew I didn't want to go back to being a therapist. So I felt really, really lost. There were multiple conversations with my husband and with my supervisor where I was just crying and I didn't know what to do. And I very accidentally stumbled into coaching and life coaching. I thought life coaching was a sham.
Wait, we should pause there for a minute because
Okay.
I think a lot of people think it's a sham, and we have a lot of meat to talk about, so I don't want to just be solely on that, but I do think a lot of people think it's a sham.
Right.
So how did you think that and then get into doing it?
Right. Well, so as a therapist, I had all this training, right? So I went to grad school and I had internships and practicums. And then even after I graduated, I had 2 years where I was heavily supervised and there were exams and there were just, there are all these rules about being a therapist. And I thought, well, somebody could just be like, I have decided I'm a coach. And they can just be like, all right, I'm selling coaching. And honestly, that's the reality of the industry. It's still true. Anybody can just decide that they're a coach and start offering coaching. And I thought, well, that is just terrible. That's terrible. Who are these people? Who do they think they are? And I will tell you, because I've been doing this since 2019. So it's been like 3 years. In the last 3 years, I have met more innately talented coaches, people who were just born to be coaches, who just really know what they're doing and really love what they do and they love to serve. And I've seen them make a huge difference in other people's lives. And it's really shifted my mindset around just the coaching industry in general. And as somebody who now exclusively does coaching and doesn't do therapy anymore, I actually enjoy the lack of regulation because I can meet with anybody anywhere. I've had clients in Europe and Abu Dhabi, and I have a lot of clients who are in Canada now. And they can be in any state, they can be anywhere, and I can meet with them and I can help them. And that's just not true for therapy.
Yeah. I mean, I think a good point around that. I like the flexibility too that you hear about, but I also think it's like anything else. You have to do your homework, right? You have
Yes.
to find somebody that's good and that is a fit for you. There's some research that has to be done there. You can't just kind of sort of, I was going to say, look in the yellow pages, which some people might not even know what that is anymore, but look on Google.
I know what that is.
Look on Google and find a list. But yeah. All right. Well, okay. We didn't want to get sidetracked with coaching too much, but you didn't see yourself going into this game, but then you just realized you needed to get out of what you were doing and you took the leap.
I did. So I stumbled across a podcast by a life coach, and it was purely by accident. I was actually looking up somebody else who's a weight loss coach and accidentally found this other person. And I started listening to her podcast and I thought, oh my gosh, this is actually really good stuff. And that's what sort of opened up this idea that maybe this is what I could do instead, because there's so much overlap between therapy and coaching. And I really enjoy working with people who don't necessarily have like a disorder, who aren't really struggling in their lives on a day-to-day basis. But I really enjoy working with people who are already doing pretty well, but they want to do better and they're struggling to do better. And that's where I come in.
And that's a good segue. And I wanted to frame this up around the holidays and the extra stress and the extra expectations and all the things. So I want to dive into a few of those things. So one of the areas I wanted to touch on was around stress management. I know you help people in that space, and I think we both agree it goes up a notch for most people during the holidays. So talk to me a little bit about what happens when people get stressed and anxious, and how our response to that might be adding more stress to the situation.
Right. So the people that I tend to work with tend to be very sort of type A. I use your face.
Guys, I just made a crazy face because you all know my backstory. That's me. There's probably quite a few listening that can fit in that little bucket too.
Right.
Yeah.
I used to say that I worked with high achievers or high performers. And then I realized I can't say that because my people don't see themselves that way. All they see is how they're not meeting their own high expectations. So I actually had to take that wording off of my website.
It's true.
Because people, I realized, were seeing it and they were like, oh, that's not me. I'm not a high achiever. I'm just like mediocre.
Yeah.
But I think what happens is, so we all just have so much on our to-do list, right? You've got your home and your work and the endless to-do list. And that is already your baseline. Then you want to introduce the holidays in. And now guess what? Now you have to spend time with your family and you have to spend all this money. There's all these expectations and all these extra to-do lists. So now not only do you have just the baseline of probably too much to do and too little time to do it and too few resources, but now you've added to that mountain. And it just creates so much stress and overwhelm for people.
What advice do you give to people to sort of manage around that? Like, those things aren't going to go away. We're going to have to do them every year, probably. Well, I guess that's a question because some could probably go away. But what kind of advice do you give?
Yeah. So I really think so. Stress lives in the body. Stress lives in the body. Anxiety lives in the body. But a lot of it is influenced by the way that we think about things and how we're thinking. So we can often sort of manage the stress with the way that we think about things and the way that we prioritize things. And I think a lot of times the way that we're taught to manage our stress actually just creates more stress. It's like, oh, you're not journaling and meditating and spending an hour at the gym every day. And these are the ways that we're taught to manage stress. And it really just adds to the to-do list and actually can exacerbate the stress. So what I really like to do is to dive into what are the facts? What exactly is on your plate? And which of those things are optional? And also, how are you thinking about yourself in relation to your to-do list? Because overwhelm is really just an emotion that comes from a ratio problem in your head, where you see the to-do list as being huge. And in comparison and in ratio to that, you see yourself as being very small, as somebody who can't keep up. So one thing that I actually teach my clients that I find is really helpful is we talk about now problems versus future problems. So when we make our to-do list, the to-do list can look like, like Santa's naughty or nice list. It like rolls out, just rolls down the street. You're never going to get to the end of that. And for the people that I work with, because they're so high achieving and high performing, they could look at that to-do list of 50 items and they got 10 things or 15 things done. And all they see are all the things they didn't get done. And at the end of the day, they're like, I am just so lazy. I'm a failure. I wasn't productive. And they also feel like they have to earn the rest. Like, I get to rest after I accomplish everything on the to-do list, which, I mean, you're not going to get everything done. The brain overestimates what it can do in a short period of time. So you're never going to feel like you earned the rest. So then when you do rest, you're going to feel guilty about it. Like you shouldn't be resting. You should be cleaning your toilets.
I feel seen right now. I didn't invite you here to coach me. I feel seen.
Well, I have to tell you, the reason that I feel like I'm an expert in all of this is because this is 100% how my brain operates.
Yes. Yes. And I can tell you myself, personal experience, but also other people in this group and that listen are people that have a very hard time relaxing, right? Because it's because of what you just said, because I can do 20, I'm going to use me because we're here and we're talking, but I can use 20 of the things on my list and get them done. But it's all about the next 10 that I haven't done yet and how am I going to fit them in and when am I going to get them done? And it's that mind is always racing. It's really hard to control that.
Yes. Yes. So I really like to identify, because the other thing is if you're not prioritizing, right? If it's just sort of like all you see are problems you need to solve, then you can, again, feel really overwhelmed by it. So what are the things you really need to figure out now versus what can wait until later, and just making a conscious decision about these are the now problems, these are the future problems. And one of the things I really like to have my clients do is really redo the way that they do their to-do list. So they have a to-do list that has, these are the things I have to get done today. And we keep that really short and really doable. And then everything else, you have a second list. And those are like bonus items. Like cleaning your toilet can maybe go on that list.
Yeah. How many days can you push that down the list?
Right? It could just, or, if it's always going to get pushed down, maybe just take it off.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I do like that. That's actually how I train myself to not get overwhelmed, is exactly that. It's, okay, what's really a priority and which ones can I tackle? And then just kind of just keep doing that, right? You keep reprioritizing the list because to your point, you're never going to get done. So
you're never going to get it done. And so I think just identifying when I get like these 3 things done today, I can rest. I'm done. I'm good. If I want to do more, then that's like a cherry on top, but I don't have to. I can go and rest.
I like that. So tying into that whole thing about stress management, when I was doing some research and I was looking at your website and some of the things that you say, I know that you have this talk track around overcoming obstacles for success. And you say there's I want to dig into one of them. You say there's 2 kinds of problems, right? There's a strategy problem and a confidence problem. And what threw me, but I think it ties into this conversation about stress, is you talked about the confidence problem looking like we don't think it's possible for us and we don't do it perfectly and we're worried about what others think and we're trapped in these indecisions. And so when I think about the stress with the holidays, I started thinking, I'm like, wow, it's true. It sort of ties in because a lot of that stress comes with managing expectations and perfectionism. Am I going to get the right gift? Is my meal that I'm serving for 20 people going to be right? Is the house going to be clean enough? I don't know, all the things, right? And I hadn't really thought about them tying into confidence, but I guess they sort of do because, I mean, you have to convince yourself that it's all good enough. It's just going to be fine, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions about being a perfectionist or aiming for perfection, people think that they're perfectionists because they have really high standards. The truth is, almost everybody who's a perfectionist is a perfectionist because it's a way of avoiding self-judgment and shame. The only way you're going to be nice to yourself is if you do it perfectly. And so what you're really trying to avoid is any kind of thought or feeling that you were inadequate, that you didn't do a good enough job, that you failed somehow. And so the way that you're trying to avoid that is by doing it perfectly.
It all ties back to negative beliefs, lack of confidence, the stories we tell ourselves,
Mhm.
all of it.
Yep, 100%.
Man.
Right?
If we just learn to master those things, we're good.
Yeah, and it starts early. Here's what I've seen is that, and I fall into this category too. If my parents listen to this, they're probably going to be like, "Oh no, it's not your fault, mom and dad." Here's what it comes down to: a child's brain is not good at distinguishing between achievement and approval and acceptance and love. So, for a lot of us, if you were a child who was well behaved, you got good grades, you did the dance recitals and piano and sports and all the things, whenever you got those, oh my gosh, great job, the child's brain makes that mean I'm lovable and I'm good enough. And then the way that translates into adulthood is that you start to think you're only ever good enough. You only ever get to feel good enough when you get the validation of doing something perfectly. You've made the most beautiful table and meal for your family, and everybody's like, this meal is so amazing. This table's so beautiful. That's the only time you ever get to feel like you're good enough and worthy.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, and I've talked about this before, and same thing. Sorry, mom. But sometimes we also train ourselves that we aren't going to be good enough. We aren't going to achieve perfection because even if we got on the honor roll, and I'm going to use that as an example, but there's a million, and we got all A's and one B, sometimes as children, the message back is, well, what happened with that B? You did so great. There must have been a specific problem with that class, right?
Yes.
And so as a child, we probably internalize that and we're like, we did so good, but it wasn't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I know I've seen myself, that's a generational thing I need to break because I've seen myself do it. But I think a lot of us were brought up with some messages like that, that obviously weren't intended to be negative, but we then carry that with us as we go into adulthood.
Yes. And you said something really important too, which is whatever we've sort of integrated, it's really easy to pass that on
Yeah.
to our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be everything from achievement and how you deal with grades and success to also, your bodies. Like I have my own stuff about my body, and now I have daughters, and I have to be really careful about, is this my stuff or is this really about them? Because sometimes when we're trying to be protective and prevent them from feeling like the same emotional and mental pain that we had, we end up actually doing the opposite.
Yeah. So hard. All right, let's slip away from stress for a minute and managing that. So the other topic I wanted to touch was procrastination. That's actually the topic that somebody suggested to do around this time frame because, and they are all related, right? We know they're all related, but you have those big to-do lists. Sometimes they're so overwhelming that we're just like, yeah, I'm not doing any of it because I can't do all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's some advice there for how we handle that, what we're doing wrong there to try to, get past it? Give me some thoughts on that.
So I think first and foremost, it's really just important to understand exactly what procrastination is. I think a lot of times we make procrastination mean like we're lazy or there's something wrong with us. Like, why can't I just make myself do this? What's really happening is, you're having a stress response. And by stress response, I'm talking like fight, flight, and freeze. There's also fawn in there, but that's not pertinent to this conversation. And procrastination is usually either a form of flight, so avoidance, or it's a form of freeze where you just can't seem to make yourself take action. So, what's happening is that however you're thinking about this thing that you want to do or you think you should be doing is creating stress in the body. And the body is then going into its way of coping, which is to avoid or freeze and shut down. And so that's going to look like you looking at your very long to-do list and having some kind of thought like, I have too much to do, or I don't have enough time, or there's no way I'm going to get all of this done. And then that thought creates this stress in the body, especially if you're a high achiever and you have this thought like, I have to do it all. Because then you're like, again, that enoughness, that worthiness is on the line. And that's a high stakes game. So you're going to have all of this stress and anxiety in the body. And the body's going to be like, yeah, no, let's go scroll social media. How about we watch that show on Netflix? That sounds pretty good. And so that is usually what that vicious cycle is that's happening when we're procrastinating.
So it boggles my mind, though. The mind is a magnificent thing, but it boggles my mind that it's completely and obviously counterproductive. So we know we've got this big list. We know we need to get it done. We're stressed because we can't. And so we say, yeah, screw it. I'm gonna avoid it altogether and go do something else. It kind of sort of defies logic. It does. But I mean, we do it. We see it all the time. So what advice do you have there for not doing that and actually tackling some of those things? Is it back to prioritizing and looking at things differently?
Yeah. So I think part of it is probably prioritizing, just really taking a look at what is it that's going on with your list of things that you think you should be doing. And also, like, where maybe you engaging in, and I didn't come up with this term. This is a term that comes from another coach. Her name is Carla Lowenthal. She calls it the perfectionist fantasy. So what happens is we sort of, when we think of all the things we want to do, we have this beautiful vision in our brains of how it's going to be so perfect. So like in the holidays, like you're just going to have this hallmark moment, this hallmark level experience. Won't it be beautiful? And in order to do that, you're going to have to do like these million things, and you're going to have to do them perfectly. And in the moment, when you're thinking about how you're going to create that, it feels so good. You get this nice little dopamine hit, like, yes, we're going to like make this beautiful experience. But then when it's time to execute on it, that's when the brain's like, wait, a million things? What?
Did I sign up for this?
Did I sign up for this? Wait, no way. There's not enough time. Then you have that stress response. Then you go into that fight, flight, freeze. Then you procrastinate. And then because you procrastinated, then you're really mean to yourself about it. Why didn't I get that stuff done? What's wrong with me? I just wasted all this time. And so then you've created all this judgment and shame on yourself. And how do you escape the judgment and shame? You go to the perfectionist fantasy, where then you get to feel good again. Well, tomorrow I'm going to get everything done. Or I'll do it, we do that stop start cycle, right? About like, oh, on Monday, then I'll like do everything perfectly. So it's this vicious cycle where we just go around and around and around. So the way that you change that is, one, after you have the awareness about what's really going on, is that you have to do something that the brain hates, which is you have to make a realistic to-do list. You have to create what I think, again, Carl Lowenthal calls the minimum baseline. What is the minimum thing I have to get done? And then you follow through when you do that. And what I like to do is you make your to-do list, and I like to ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, looking at this thing you want to do, these actions you want to take, how much do you believe you're going to follow through with it? And if it's not an 8 or higher, you need to change your list. Because what happens is that when you engage in that sort of cycle of not following through with the things you say you're going to do, it erodes self-trust. It erodes confidence. You start to be like, I'm not dependable. I never do what I say I'm going to do. So even if you just do that minimum baseline, it's going to feel like not enough, but it's going to actually start to create this belief that you do follow through with the things that you say you're going to do. It's going to change your relationship with yourself. And then you might feel comfortable doing more in the future.
I was going to ask about the not enough, because you mentioned that before as well. And that enoughness is definitely, I don't know if that's a word, it's definitely a reoccurring theme in all these things, right? I mean, it's not feeling like enough and not doing enough and not getting, I guess maybe it ties back into that perfectionism, that whole cycle.
Yeah. I like to ask people when they're like, well, I didn't do enough. I always like to ask, what is enough? How do you define enough? What is that? How will you know that you've done enough?
And I would bet a lot of people don't know how to answer that question.
They don't know. They're like, oh, actually.
Which validates the fact that there is no ever enough.
There is no ever enough.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it goes back to retraining our brains to understand that there will never be enough, that there will never be that perfection fantasy, as she calls it, and that we have to set more realistic goals and expectations for ourselves and start training ourselves that it is enough. that when we don't do everything on the list and we have the holiday and everybody comes over and we forgot to put the rolls in the oven, that nobody gets sick and dies because we forgot the rolls. Who cares?
Right. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
Yeah. We think, though,
And-
going in, they're going to care.
right. Nobody cares.
So I guess that's part of it, right? You got to let some things fall and realize that it's okay.
And I even like to say that, you know what, you could do nothing and you are still enough. You could just do nothing. You could invite everybody over and order pizza. You could ask them to bring over everything. You could have a filthy house and not have showered for a week and have just laid on the couch scrolling TikTok and watching Netflix. You could do nothing productive. And you know what? You can still be enough. Enoughness is not something you have to earn with your to-do list.
I love that sentiment. And I think it's something that people have to build a practice around getting comfortable with that thought, because I know personally, and I've talked about this on a previous episode where I had a bunch of girlfriends coming over and I was doing the thing that we all do, right? And trying to get everything ready. And at one point I was like, I don't even remember now what it was, but I was questioning like if this was going to be good enough. Oh, I was making quiches, which I never used the recipe before, blah, blah, blah. But I was questioning it. And then I said to myself, I caught myself, I stopped, I paused. I said to myself, these are your friends. They could care less what this thing tastes like. It's going to be fine, right? And I just let it go. That was a big thing. But I think that's your point. Like we have to really train ourselves to catch it and then talk ourselves out of that unrealistic expectation and learn that going with it and being reinforced that it will be enough. I think your point about just not doing anything and just having everybody over and ordering pizza is a great one, because that thought is a good image and it would be fine. Everybody would have a good time being together and just hanging out. So yeah, it's a good thought.
Yeah. If your baseline is enough, then anything extra you do is like amazing and great. You can do it. You could do the exact same actions, but if the driving force behind it is, I need to impress everybody, I need to like meet these expectations, then I get to feel good, then I get to, if you're trying to earn something from yourself, if you're withholding some kind of positive emotion from yourself that you have to earn by creating this result, that's a completely different experience than, you know what, these are people I love. They love me. We get to spend time together. And you know what sounds really fun is making this quiche.
Yeah. Yeah. It's coming from a different place. Yeah, I like that. It's a good thought, a good way to reframe it. So I didn't prep you for this, or just so people know, we don't kind of go through all of the questions, but we do have topics at hand. But I didn't tell you that I wanted to talk about this, but after doing some additional research, I know it's something you talk about. So, and it ties into our topic. So talking about the holidays, one of the stresses that comes up is overeating. So we have a lot of people in the group that we've been on these health journeys. A lot of us have lost a lot of weight, some still working at it. A good chunk of us have that in common. And so as I think about the holidays, I often think that is one of the stresses, because people know they're going to be getting together in 17 different places and there's going to be all the yummiest food that they all want to eat at those events. And managing that in the moment is challenging, but also I think the thought of it for some people is stressful. Any advice there?
Yes. Okay. I have a lot of advice, but we'll keep it simple. So again, I mean, I always sort of think of things within the framework of what is your relationship with yourself and what's really going to make you feel good. And so when it comes to any decision we make, and especially when it comes to food, there are two different decision-making mechanisms. One is deciding ahead of time, you know what, I'm going to go to this party and I'm going to eat whatever I want. I'm just going to enjoy myself. I know there's going to be delicious food and I'm just going to eat whatever I want. Or there is the other decision-making mechanism where it's like, I'm going to go to this party and I am going to eat really healthy and I'm only going to eat from the veggie plate or whatever it is that they have. I'm going to have one slice of pie. So you decide ahead of time, but then you get there and then you see the food and then your mouth starts to water and the urge comes up and you start to justify it to yourself. Like, you know what, but it's the holidays. They never make these kinds of cookies except this time of year. So it's okay if I just have one. And then you end up just sort of eating whatever you want. The actions can be exactly the same. but they're two different decision-making mechanisms. The one where you decide ahead of time, this is what I'm going to eat, and then you eat that thing, still creates and reinforces a positive relationship with yourself, where you trust yourself, where you know that you're in control around food. The other one is reinforces the belief, I am not in control around food. I just end up eating whatever. I never follow through. I can't stick to a diet. So I really like the idea of, again, create a plan ahead of time. You probably have a decent idea of what is going to be there. And a lot of times ahead of time, again, this sort of perfectionist fantasy idea, it's like, I'm going to eat nothing but the carrot sticks and celery. I'm going to eat nothing but chicken and broccoli. It sounds amazing in the moment. But then when it's time to execute on that, it's like, but look at all these other things. And you give into that urge. And then when you give into the urge, it reinforces those neural pathways of you just sort of see the food and eat it. When I was working on my own sort of overeating and emotional eating, a coach asked, like, well, what thought do you have before you eat the food? And I was like, I don't have a thought. I just sort of like walk by the cookie and then it's like in my mouth.
I'm laughing, you guys, because there's many of us that can totally relate. But yeah.
It was like, what thought? There's no thought. It's just like there and then it's in my mouth. Or you're like white knuckling, right? You're like, oh God.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do
right?
it.
You're like sweating through your clothes.
Again, I feel seen.
So just decide ahead of time. Like, but make sure whatever your plan is, that it is just an 8 or higher, that you know you're going to follow through with it, that it's not this really noble, perfect idea of how you're going to eat when you're at this party or at this event.
I do like that. But what comes to mind is, okay, so what happens when people struggle with that plan, meaning they sort of let themselves off the hook all the time. So, okay, I'm going to build a plan for the next 2 months, November and December, full of events. And I'm just going to say, my plan for every event is that I'm going to eat what I want and I'm going to be just fine because the rest of the days I won't, or something like, that gives yourself extra permission because that's not getting you towards goal either. So how do you maintain the balance of sort of making yourself be in tune with your real goals and having a plan that works? So you got to find that balance, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have to find the balance. And I think you have to know, why is this your goal? Because if your goal is just not always going to feel compelling, sometimes that cookie is going to look way more desirable than this idea of the scale being a certain number in a few weeks or a few months or even tomorrow. So you sort of have two brains, right? So you have this sort of more grown-up brain that understands consequences and thinks ahead. But then you have this sort of more primitive lizard type brain that is all about getting as much pleasure as possible, avoiding pain, and doing as little as possible. And so you really want to know, well, first, the plan is important. You want to have a plan that is specific, like this is what I'm going to eat. I'm going to get my SHIT together. It's not a plan. And a lot of times that's what our plans look like. I'm going to do better. I'm going to eat healthy.
Too generic, right?
Right? I'm going to get it together.
Right.
It's too generic. What does that even mean? So that's your plan. But then guess what? Then you're like opening your pantry.
Yeah.
And your brain is going to be like, what looks good? And what looks easy? And let's eat that.
So it's back to, being specific, being as specific as possible. I know we've heard that before and we've, we've read and studied a lot of things that all point to that. You have to have some specific actions. And I think the other thing that we hear reinforcement on is if you go off track, don't wait for the next big event or the next Monday or the next whatever, the next moment, the next decision, the next opportunity. That's when you recalibrate, right? And do it differently to go more towards goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think this idea that you're going to follow your plan perfectly it's just not realistic. So if you do go off your plan, how do you evaluate that from a place of neutrality versus taking a dump on yourself emotionally and beating yourself up over it. Because if you're beating yourself up over it, that's going to create all of this stress and shame and anxiety and judgment. And you know what you're going to want to do? You're going to want to escape it. And how are you probably going to want to escape it? By eating some food and numbing it all out. So if you go off your plan, just evaluate what happened.
So evaluate what happened and think about how you can make changes so that it won't happen again with curiosity and not judgment.
Mm-hmm. And evaluate it almost like a scientist. And always start with what you did well. What did you do well? Maybe you made the plan in the first place, so that was great.
Mm.
Or maybe you went to the party with really good intentions, and that was great. There's always something you did well. Always.
Yeah. So calling that out, that's important.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's just important to also just ask yourself, how can you make this as easy as possible? So when I was building my coaching business, I also had the goal of losing like 10 or 15 pounds. And most people would tell you like, that's really dumb. Don't do two big goals at once.
But if you're a high achieving perfectionist, of course you should.
Then you're just going to do them all. You're just going to do them all, and you're going to do them all perfectly. And so I knew that planning was key. I knew that making decisions from my adult prefrontal cortex brain versus my lizard brain was going to be key to my success. And I knew that I hate making plans. So I was like, how do I make this as easy as possible? I wasn't going to be the person who sat down and made a plan for every single day. That just wasn't going to be me. So I made one plan that I could apply like to every day. So like I eat the same thing for breakfast and lunch almost every single day. 2 decisions done for 7 days a week, basically, right? Right from the get-go. And then it was like, all right, I'm just going to eat the same thing for dinner on Mondays. And then I'm going to do a different dinner on Tuesday. So it was like, meatloaf Monday, taco Tuesday, frozen pizza Wednesday. I also hate to cook, so everything has to be super easy. So that's what we did. It was like, how can I make this as easy as possible? So I just decide and I plan once and then I'm good to go.
Yeah, that's key. So I've lost quite a bit of weight, still have more to go, but lost quite a bit of weight. And a lot of us talk about that too. Simplicity is it, right? The same food goes in the grocery cart every week, the same prep. If you do prep, and I'm not big on doing tons of it, but I do like I'll do a fruit salad every single week. I'll make some chicken breast every single week, right? Because then I buy the bagged lettuce or whatever, and you can throw a salad together in a second. But you got to do a lot of the same things so that it becomes a pattern, a behavior pattern that's just easy. You don't have to think about it, and so you have the stuff at the ready, and so that makes you less inclined to go off course. So yeah, some good advice there. So before I wrap up, there's 2 things. So I want to ask you if there's anything we didn't touch on, sort of in this vein of preparing and thinking about and managing the holiday stuff that we didn't touch on that you would want to put out there. So I'll ask you that first. Is there anything we didn't touch on that you would think people should be thinking about or know about? Or any parting advice?
Again, like we said before, right? It's either a strategy problem or a confidence problem. So either your strategy is probably, if it's a strategy problem, it probably is that it's not a good fit for you or it's too complicated. Our brains love to make things complicated. So always asking yourself, how can I make this as easy as possible? Or asking yourself the question of, where am I making this harder than it needs to be? And then the confidence piece, where are you maybe lacking belief that you can do it? Where are you not having your own back? Because you may have a really powerful why about why you want to show up in a certain way. And I think if anything, that's a better goal than any other goal. So regardless of, the compliments you get on your meal or how beautiful your Christmas tree or your holiday presentation looks or what have you, if we just let all of that go, how do you want to experience this time? How do you want to show up? And how can you make yourself proud? And what would that look like? And then how can you create that? Because the scale's going to say what the scale says at the end of the day. The scale is a bonus result. But how else if you went to bed at night, what would make you feel proud? That you spent some time with your family, you ate well, you loved on your body, you loved on yourself, you loved on the people that you love. What's really going to make you feel proud and feel good at the end of the day?
I love that thought. We're working on, learning to be more present, be in the moment more. And I know personally I've done a ton of work on that. And when I think about some of the events or holidays over the years, I often actually miss out on the event and the holiday and the socialization aspect of it because I'm so in my head trying to get everything right, which you can never get everything right, but it's just that constant, I got to do it, that thing. And when you take a step back from that and you set that expectation down and you actually say, it's okay. It's okay if I don't do everything perfectly. It's okay if I don't do if I don't have the best Christmas tree or I don't do the full meal and I just order pizza, whatever the scenario is, you actually can be in the present moment and enjoy the people and the socialization and what it's supposed to be about instead of where your head takes it. So for me, I think that's a really good thought and something that I know I've been working on. So something that's probably good for everybody to think about.
Yeah. And if you have awareness about your thoughts and you know the importance of thoughts, it's really, sometimes you can end up using that against yourself. You can be like, oh no, I can't think this thought. It's so negative. And then you end up in sort of this wrestling match in your brain. Sometimes instead of trying to think a new thought, it can be helpful just to add a new thought. So it can be like, so this is one I worked on with a client, right? So it was back in the summer with pool parties. It was like, I'm going to go to this party and I'm going to be the heaviest person there. And she was trying to come up with a new thought and it just wasn't available. There was a strong possibility she was going to be the heaviest person there. So trying to be like, I love my body.
Yeah. It doesn't change the thought and the reality. Yeah.
Exactly. So what we did was instead of trying to change that thought or eliminate that thought because it made her feel so bad, we added on and nobody cares. Everybody loves me. Everybody here loves me. So it was like, I'm the heaviest person here and nobody cares.
I love that perspective. The adding on. That's really good because I do think a lot of times we try to eliminate the thought, the negative beliefs. I hadn't thought about that, but I'm going to now to try to say, but what else? What's another perspective? Elizabeth Benton, who wrote Chasing Cupcakes, I don't know if you know her. She's fantastic. But she always says, what other perspective can you have? And, how else can you look at it? What other questions can you have? And it makes me think of that because similar, right? It doesn't have to be an or, it can be an and.
Yes. Yeah, they can both be true.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much for today. Before I let you go, well, two things. I'm going to put all your links and all your contact information, of course, in the show notes so people know how to find you if they want to reach out or check out your website and see what you have to offer. But as a kind of fun thing, in your longer bio, there was a little comment there about how, you love to do kind of wacky things and break out into song, and you didn't do anything crazy here. So I want to know, what's that look like in real life? Is there like flash mobs going on or, what's the craziest thing you've ever done?
Oh, there is a lot of embarrassing of my children is what is going on. They're like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? I used to feel really self-conscious about the fact that I say the wrong thing and I do the wrong thing. And now I've decided people love it. And it is like one of my best qualities that I'm like an awkward person. And so I just learned to embrace it. So yeah, sometimes I will just sing randomly. Usually if technology isn't working, I'll just start singing. When I was a therapist in the jail, my clients loved it. I was like, I'm singing.
I love this. I love this.
Or I'll start dancing and my kids are like, what? Why? Stop. And I'm like, we're in public and we're dancing. What?
So I have a secret dream of being in a flash mob. But more seriously, I love what you said because I think we're soul sisters in a way because a lot of the stuff that you used to do, same thing, I'm kind of recovering from all that. I've had a decent level position in corporate America for 25 years and I often thought the same thing about but me, I say the wrong things sometimes. I'm never the perfect polished person. Obviously my body wasn't always the one that could be dressed up perfectly. And I didn't always have the exact right word. And it took me, I don't know, work, but it took me work to finally get in my brain and realize, yeah, but you know so much. Like you're a subject matter expert on all these things and you've coached and built teams for all these years. Like they listen to you. They don't care if you say the wrong word every now and then, like if it doesn't come out perfectly polished. And look at me, over here having a podcast where I don't say all the right things.
Right?
But who cares? Who cares?
Yes. Who cares? Nobody cares. People love mistakes. Nobody likes a perfectionist. Ew, yuck.
Yeah.
We hate those people. Just kidding. I'm sure they're fine. But
no, it's the authenticity, right? I mean, I know the people that I really connect with, they're people that just are their authentic selves. And I think that's how people like us as well. So, but I think it takes a bit to get there, to get comfortable in that space. So do it messy.
Do it messy. People love mess.
Yeah. The message comes out of the mess always.
Ooh, I like that.
Thank you so much. Seriously, this has been great. And I think it'll be informative for anyone that listens. So thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Message in the Middle with Marianne. If you enjoyed the podcast, please take a minute to share it and write a review as it helps bring new listeners to our audience. If you'd like to keep the conversation going between episodes, please join us at Facebook group Message in the Middle with Marianne.